All right, now on to the next lesson. I hope you've been liking some of these associations because the more and more examples that you get, the more successful you're going to be. That's why I'm packing this course full of different fun examples. So, even if you don't want to learn how to say hello in 9 different languages, do the exercise anyways, just to practice this. In this exercise, we're going to talk about how to memorize the first 10 presidents of the United States. Now, I get it. If you're not American and you're taking this course, hey, take it with a grain of salt. I'm Canadian myself, and I took a while to come around to this lesson. But, America is really influential on the world stage, and I'm also a U.S. citizen, so I, kind of come by this honestly. If you are American, only about 1%, according to studies, 1% of people can actually recite the first 10 presidents. So after doing this lesson, you'll be in that top 1% of Americans. So I think this is a pretty good exercise to go through. Plus, it's a great memory exercise. So this is going to be one of the kind of free-form memory exercises where you start with an image and you kind of go to the next link in the chain, but it's going to kind of flow in kind of a story. And here's what I mean. Starting off with George Washington. So we want to think of a substitute word for Washington. The first thing I think of would be a washing machine. Now, the neat thing is you don't have to memorize George too. You don't need Curious George on top of the washing machine or anything like that because you know George Washington, you know the name, right? So just remembering the word wash or washing machine in this case will be a link that'll be more than sufficient to get you to remember that name. Sometimes these basics are really, really important. All right, now the next name is John Adams. Now we actually have a couple of Adams. We have John Adams and John Quincy Adams. I'm going to use the Q for Quincy Adams to distinguish that later on. So for this time, John Adams, I'm just going to use the word Adams. And what I actually think of is a dam, like a giant concrete building that holds back water, right? A giant dam. And I imagine a washing machine crashing into a dam. I told you action was one of my memory modes. So that's my first link. I imagine this washing machine flying like a meteorite into this dam. The next thing is Thomas Jefferson. And the only thing I think of is Jefferson Airplane. And I imagine an airplane kind of scooting over the dam, and maybe it hits the dam and lands on the water, kind of scoots a little bit further down the water in my image and lands at a nice beach area. And then we have, so Washington hit the dam for Adams, and Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, is the Jefferson Airplane that scoots over it and lands at that beach. If you don't know the reference for Jefferson Airplane, look it up. It's some great music, great band, and if you want, you can use, something else, but I use Jefferson Airplane. All right, the next one is Madison. James Madison. What I imagine is welcome mats. So you're starting to see how this substitute word idea pops in. You just think of the first thought that sounds similar. Madison and a mat are similar. Usually I try to find the phonetic in the very beginning. The mat and the mad is close enough for me. Now, you could maybe think of Mad Magazine. You could think of a whole bunch of other different things. Madison Avenue maybe. But always bring it down to an object. And I'm going to use a welcome mat. Just a mat that you'd put outside your door to your house. So I imagine a ton of these welcome mats flying out of the airplane. It crashes and there's just billions of these welcome mats just covering the place. And again, that's oddity, something where it shouldn't belong. All these welcome mats just all over the place. That sticks in my mind. And now we have Monroe. James Monroe is the next one. So for Monroe, I think of a rowboat. Monroe, rowboat works for me. And I imagine someone collecting up all of these mats and putting them in the rowboat. So what do we have? Washington hits the Adams and the Jefferson Airplane lands at the shore and it's covered in mats for Madison. And then Monroe, we have the rowboat, and already we're at 5. Now the next person we have is John Q. Adams. So Q for Quincy, I actually think of like a cue ball, and I knew somebody who was actually a good friend and he's a very nice guy, but he actually went by cue ball because he had shaved his head when he was very young. Even though when I knew him he had hair, he went by cue ball for some reason. So I imagine him, or you can imagine any sort of bald person. Sorry if you have hair loss and you're offended by that, but it's just a silly image to try to get this into our head. You could also imagine an actual pool cue, or maybe the Q from Star Trek. That's actually an even better one. I'm going to use that. So imagine Q is pulling on this rowboat. And again, that's for Monroe, pulling the mats for Madison. So Madison, Monroe, and now Q, John Quincy Adams. After that, we have Jackson. Well, I'd imagine the Jackson 5, if you can remember that far back. Of course, the famous one from the Jackson 5 is Michael Jackson. And I'd imagine that Michael Jackson is basically, getting that rowboat. They rowed to another shore and Michael Jackson is pulling the rowboat out of the water. Now, you could think of a lot of different things for Jackson. You could think of car jack. You could think of a jackhammer. You could think of a lot of things, Jack in the Box. But I imagine Michael Jackson just for this. So I imagine him moonwalking while he's pulling the boat. That works for me. And the next one is Martin Van Buren. Now, it's kind of a complex name here, but the word van would actually remind me of the whole thing. So I'm just going to use van for right now. And I'd imagine Michael Jackson pulling the boat up and getting into a van. That's it. That's all I have to do. As long as I visualize this clearly, it'll all stick. Michael Jackson getting into, the 18 van or something like that. That would work for me. After Van Buren, we have William Henry Harrison. So I want to pick a phonetic in there that, kind of works for me. I could use Henry like O. Henry Bar maybe, but for me, Harrison actually kind of works like Harry and the Hendersons, I guess, kind of is what I think of. So I think of just a lot of hair for Harrison. And again, we're going to associate this to the last thing, which was the van. So imagine that van covered in hair. So just to review, we have the Q pulling those welcome mats. So Matt Monroe for the rowboat, then Q, John Quincy Adams, meeting up with Michael Jackson, so for Jackson, and then getting into the van for Van Buren. The van is covered in hair for Harrison. And finally, we have John Tyler. John Tyler is the 10th president, and I would just imagine tying all those hairs into knots. Imagine you got a whole bunch of people beside the van just tying these hairs into knots. They're Tyler. Now, can you keep on going? Absolutely. There's actually a Polka King in the full associations that I have. But let's see how well you did. We had 10 items here in order. What was the first item? It was flying out of the sky. That's right, it was a washing machine for George Washington. And after that, what did it hit? It hit a dam for John Adams, right? And then what kind of skimmed the dam and landed at the shore? It was an airplane for Jefferson Airplane, that's Thomas Jefferson. And then what fell out of the airplane was mats for James Madison. And then they collected all the mats and put them into a rowboat for James Monroe. And who was rowing the rowboat was Q from Star Trek for John Quincy Adams. And then who grabbed the rowboat after that? It was Michael Jackson for Andrew Jackson. You might think of a different Jackson, but I went with that. Anyway, so I insert the, I don't know, Tito joke here. I don't know. So imagine Michael Jackson was getting into what? He was getting into a van for Van Buren. That's right, Martin Van Buren. And then the van was covered in what? Well, William Henry Harrison was covered in hair. And then what were they doing to the hair? They were tying it for John Tyler. So we've just gone through the whole list. The cool thing is you can go backwards as well. Try going forwards and backwards and testing yourself. Test yourself a couple of days from now, and then a week from now, and then maybe a month from now, just to make sure you lock this in. Because even though it's a memory technique, you still want to have a little bit of a review just to remind your brain why this is important. All right, and if you didn't follow along or go through the links, by all means, start this video over, go through the links, make the links your own, make up your own association. That works just fine too. But I want to give you lots of examples because the more times you use this exercise and do these associations, the better you're going to get at this skill. All right, stay tuned for the next lesson. I'm going to introduce you now to the journey method. The journey method is something that is ancient. It's sometimes called the Roman room method or the method of loci, loci being a Greek word that means what you probably think it means. It's the origin of the word location. So a long time ago, people discovered that we as human beings are incredibly good at remembering locations. If I were to ask you, say, for example, to visualize your bedroom right now, or if you have a vehicle, visualize your car right now, you could visualize the inside, you could visualize the outside. If you visualize your bedroom, maybe you could imagine what's on the countertop of your bedroom, what's on the the dresser, that sort of thing. What's on your bed? Is it messy right now? Or are the things on the floor? You can visualize that, and surprisingly enough, you are actually going to be quite accurate. You can picture a lot of things in that image. So places that we've been before on a regular basis, we have in our head very, very strongly. Now, what we can do is now use that incredible ability to remember other information. So we can organize our information. Say, for example, before when I was talking about memorizing a foreign language, well, we can take all day and all night connecting the foreign word to its English translation and back and forth. We can do flashcards and do that a whole lot. But you know what? It starts to become very, very difficult once you get over, say, 100 words or some emergency phrases. It becomes really difficult to review. It becomes really difficult to keep it all in your head. And you have to start organizing this information. What if you're going to be tested, right? What if you're going into a test and you're studying information? You have to realize that, whatever your curriculum is probably going to be divided into subcategories. I give you a great example. We have a lot of my clients who were studying for the bar, and they're studying for law. Well, law is a big topic, and then it branches off into a whole bunch of little topics, right? You could be talking about family law. You could be talking about, court cases and civil trials, criminal law, right? Then when you go there, you could be branching off into a whole bunch of different areas. In other words, you can't just memorize every single law as if it's its own island, its own little fact. You can't memorize all the facts and not get confused after a while. Because what if you memorize, something that has to do with family law, but it sounds similar to something that has to do with criminal law? You got to keep that stuff separated, right? And especially if you're going to be tested on this, organizing information becomes even more important. If I was memorizing all the, names for bones in the body, I could link them one after another. But if I organize them into categories like the legs or the chest or the cranium or something like that, all of a sudden it becomes a lot easier. So organization and categorization has been with us for a long time. And I'm here to tell you the best way to handle this from a memory perspective is to take all of that information that we're organizing, and you're going to find more organizational methods as we continue down this world of information architecture. the best way is to organize that information spatially in terms of a journey. What I would do is, if I'm studying something, let's say a language, I would have a journey for all of my vocabulary. I would start off with basic stuff and then get to more complex things. Sometimes I actually pick a city. If I'm memorizing the word for fountain in one language, then I will associate that to a famous fountain in that city. And then I will associate other things to, the word for coffee to a cafe right beside the fountain, and the word for brick to the cobblestone bricks beside the fountain. And then you can keep on going and create this little mental map of everything that's going on. Not the same as a mind map, but an actual legitimate journey map, if you will. What we're going to do is take advantage of the journey method for this exercise. This is a very simple exercise to kind of get you started on how you'd organize information. So one simple example is a grocery list. Grocery lists, to-do lists, all these sorts of little lists to do out throughout the day. You have to start organizing them, because as you start memorizing these things, they start to kind of overwhelm you. You don't need to remember this grocery list, for example, after you've shopped for the groceries. So if you're trying to memorize something else and it has similar items into it than the grocery list has, then you can get confused. And the whole point of memory work is to not be confused when you're trying to recall the information. So how do we accomplish this? What I want you to do is think of your car. If you don't have a car, you can think of someone else's car. Just pick a car in your mind's eye, because this is literally how I would go through memorizing a list of groceries. It's very simple. I do it almost all the time. I have a grocery list here, actually, that was recently something that we had to go for. I'm going to use this as an example, real life example. So we have groceries, and I have a number of things on here, and what I do is I associate them to different parts of my car. I start in one spot, and then I go from left to right around a location, and that's how I do my journeys. It's very much like reading. You go from left to right on a page and then from top to bottom. If I am using a location for my journeys to put things in, then I'm going to go from left to right and top to bottom. And that's really important, because you have to be able to have a system so that you can recall things in the right order. So starting with the beginning, I actually start with my steering wheel. You might start somewhere else, but I like starting there. And the first item on the list is ice cream. So I want you to imagine the steering wheel of this car that I asked you to imagine earlier. Imagine it, a bunch of ice cream melting all over the steering wheel. Like, it's really getting everywhere, right? The next thing is bread. So going from left to right, I imagine kind of the dashboard of my car right up by the windshield. And I imagine a bunch of loaves of bread just stuffed in there, and maybe they're baking in the sun, so they're getting all brown or moldy or something, like really exaggerated is my point. The next item in the list is chips. I would mentally move over from the dashboard from left to right and top to bottom. The next thing on the bottom would be the glove compartment in the passenger side. Now, I'm missing a lot of spots. You could use other spots, but these are the spots that I use. In that glove compartment, I would imagine just stuffing a big bag of chips, just ramming a bag of chips in there and just destroying it, right? Going a little further down, I would actually go right down to the feet part of the passenger side, and that's where I would put the eggs, which is the next item in the list. So I just imagine a whole bunch of eggs on the floor and someone's stomping them with their feet, and my passenger is stomping them with their feet. Next, moving to the right, I would imagine the passenger side seat. And the next item in my list is light bulbs. So there's a bunch of light bulbs in that seat. In fact, millions of light bulbs, and my passenger is just sitting in them, crushing them into a million pieces, getting, jabbed all over with this glass, and it's kind of crazy. The next item in the list is milk. I would imagine pouring milk onto the back of the seat. So again, the main seat of the passenger side is light bulbs, and then there's milk just soaking into the back of the seat. So what have we done so far? I've got ice cream in front of me. I've got the bread on the dashboard. I've got the chips shoved into the glove compartment. The floor has eggs on it. The light bulbs are sitting on the passenger seat, and then there's milk poured all over the next seat. And you can keep on going. After milk, we have avocados. So avocados, I'm kind of mentally moving into the back seat of the car, and I imagine the window just smashed through with a bunch of avocados just being thrown into the seat. That kind of works for me, right? After avocado is carrots, and I'd imagine a bunch of carrots just kind of sticking out of the seat like they were jabbed in there like knives. Again, when you do your journey, you want to make it exaggerated. You don't want to just make a bunch of carrots just sitting there. You're going to forget about it. So make it interesting. And that's kind of, why I'm opening up my mind to show you how I would jab a bunch of carrots into that seat. Then I move a little further. The next item in the list is oatmeal. I imagine a whole bunch of oatmeal, all wet oatmeal, just sticking in the back window for some reason. I got all the carbs in the windows for some reason. So the oatmeal is sticking in the back the window, and it's making a big smell and everything. And after that, I have lighters. Lighters is the next item in the list. I imagine the driver's side back window is kind of swirling around in my head. I imagine maybe lighting that on fire or melting something in that side of the seat with those lighters. This is all in your imagination, and honestly, it just takes a few seconds to do. It takes, just a few seconds per item, and you can commit all this to memory. Let's do the review. What was the first item in the list? Well, think about it. I started with the steering wheel, and that's ice cream, that's right. And then what was on the dashboard? It was bread, that's right. And then what was in the glove compartment? Chips. And then what was on the floor beside or underneath the glove compartment? Those were eggs. And then what was on the passenger seat? Light bulbs, that's right. And then moving over, what was after light bulbs? What was in the kind of being poured onto the back of the seat? I kind of gave you a hint there. That's milk. And then after milk, what was going through the window in the back seat was avocados. What was being jammed into the back seat there? Carrots. What was in the back window? Oatmeal. And then over on the other side, what were we doing to the door? We were kind of vandalizing it with a bunch of lighters. Now, If you, congratulations on going through this. If you missed any, just make those associations a little more vibrant. What you want to do is connect it, associate it to the location, and make it very, very strong, and it will stick. The other thing is that, and that's kind of what I talk about debugging. When you make a list like this, go through it once just to make sure you did all the associations in the right order and the right way, and then that'll help, lock it in. If you want to strengthen this, you can actually nitpick and get every little, vent and valve and button in the car to be a different location. You can have one thing associated to one button, another thing associated to another button. That's fine. Sometimes I find that people jam these things too close together, so don't use every possible feature. But suffice to say, we could have had a list of even 50 items in a vehicle quite comfortably if we just zoomed in a little bit on all the different features. You can absolutely do that. The door handle could have an item, the stick shift could have an item, all things like that. But I think this is kind of a good primer of how the journey method really does work.
You're here because you know that having a better memory can be a great advantage in your life, but you may not have realized how transformative memory and brain training can be to your entire life. When you train your memory with my techniques, it can absolutely affect your personal and professional life, and it will dramatically improve your career. It completely transforms how other people see you, though, and that is the key. I'm living proof, actually. When I started out, I was diagnosed with ADHD and dyslexia as a kid. I was incredibly depressed about my prospects and chances in the future. Now, educators at the time were not very helpful, so I took it upon myself to learn absolutely everything I could about memory and mnemonics and mentalism, speed reading and speed learning, mental training of all sorts. And I actually became one of the world's foremost experts on brain training, now referred to as brain hacking. I got into the Guinness Book of Records for my memory twice, and I'm still the current world record holder for most number of decks of cards memorized in a single sighting. This course will cover my secrets for improving your memory, including a technique on cards. And you will learn how to easily commit facts and figures to memory, memorize names, speeches, texts, technical terms, ACE tests, and much more. But that's just the beginning. This course goes beyond all other courses in memory because I have actually invented new techniques for brain training and memory. And I also developed an entirely new method for taking control of your ability to focus. It actually became a very powerful study tool for tens of thousands of non-ADD students to gain the ability to have total control of your ability to focus. Sometimes this is referred to as flow and focus. And it's very powerful, and you're not going to find it anywhere else because I developed it. Now, the real story is not the demonstrations I've done on TV or any that my students have been able to perform, but what brain training did for the rest of my life and others. I went from being known as the ADD kid performing at the bottom of the class to one of the top geniuses to graduate from that school. I also use these memory techniques in a variety of fields beyond just being the memory guy. These brain hacks give me the ability to do far more than the average person. Up until then, most people believe that you basically try to go for a career that is as good as you possibly can be, as smart as you are, to find a very awkward way to say it. But essentially, people always believe they have a certain level of academic ability and that you can't actually go beyond that level. If you want to get more out of life, if you want the respect and admiration of your friends and your peers and your loved ones, then you're in the right place. Take this course and be transformed.